Okay, today our speaker will be David Petering. He's Emeritus Professor from UWM. So without further ado, we're going to start the program.
Thank you very much. Pleased to be here on a Sunday morning. Even more pleased. Whoa. How do I carry this around? Anyway, I'm even more pleased to have found a parking place. So, anyway, I'm an emeritus distinguished professor of chemistry and biochemistry. And probably the one thing you should know is that I used to teach a course in the Honors College called Sustainable Earth. And the centerpiece of that was really talking about the climate change problem. So it's out of that background that I've continued doing these things and giving talks and so forth during this time when I become an emeritus professor. So we're going to talk today about kind of a sub-issue with respect to climate change, having to do with what are called hyperscale data centers. Now, we're going to put that in context, and believe me, I'm sure you're saying, geez, I'm hearing so much about data centers. What more can he say? Well, we'll see whether there's something else to be said here, but it is certainly a major, major problem at the present time. So, here's the basic issue that we're facing with respect to climate, and that is that since the middle of the last century, surface temperatures around the planet have been increasing, and in fact, it looks like it's an exponential increase almost. The last few years have actually even exaggerated the rate at which climate change temperatures are going up. And I put the arrow there to indicate 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, some of you may be familiar with that notion. That's 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's the limit that climate scientists have said that we can reach without sort of tipping over into a planet that is going to be severely damaged by climate change, more than we experience even at the present time. Okay, so in that context, why do we call this a wicked problem? We call it a wicked problem because there are so many facets to it, and they almost operate independently even as they interact with one another. Obviously, when we talk about temperature, we're talking about climate, we're talking about the whole Earth warming and what that means for climates around the planet. Of course, we're concerned about this as a living organism because of what's happening to the biosphere because of that. Okay, so that's another aspect of this. But of course, the reason that we're in this situation, as I'll talk to you a bit about, is basically our economics. And but our economics don't stand alone. They are sort of embedded within our political system and the way we operate and so forth. Obviously, our whole society is dependent upon what we do in our economic lives and so forth. And so this becomes a very complicated problem, and therefore also very complicated in terms of any solutions that we might offer here. Well, there are also these changes in what's possible in terms of technology. And just recently, we've moved into this era of what people are calling AI, artificial intelligence, and the data centers that support artificial intelligence, if you will. And these are data centers likes of which we have never seen before, and we may never have seen anything like this before in terms of their physical demands on the environment and so forth. So these are what we call hyperscale because they're so large, data centers and so forth. And those are the technical possibilities that are becoming a reality And of course, they're being driven again by economics. These tech companies are commercial entities, okay? So they want to make money. All right, so we're going to look at this from the standpoint of, first of all, AI. I'm not going to focus on AI, but I think we can't talk about data centers if you don't do some evaluation of what's going on in data centers. So what good is AI? The second part of this is, briefly, causation of climate change, responding to climate change, and then within that context, all of a sudden, something that's quite unexpected, it's happened so quickly, this unexpected challenge of data centers. All right, so now we go down to the subset. This is also a wicked problem. Okay, we're going to talk about energy with respect to data centers. We're going to talk about their water use and so forth. But data centers are here to basically permit this artificial intelligence technology to be able to operate. And that technology now is purported to, this is all predictive, you might say, some of it is already here, have major impacts on our knowledge, education, jobs, and indeed the whole future of the society. All right, so I'm just going to briefly touch on each one of those things. Okay, something called machine learning AI provides tools that really do help support scientific discovery and medical diagnosis and things like this. And I give as an example here something that, for me, a biochemist, was really quite remarkable, and that is that an artificial intelligence machine learning program was able to figure out something that scientists have wanted to do for decades, and that is be able to predict three-dimensional structures of proteins. Proteins are really at the heart of what makes our body work, and we have never been able to do that before, and with this program now we can do this, and I don't know if this looks like anything to you, but it's beauty for me, okay? So, but the point is, this machine learning technology is a very important advance, if you will. On the other hand, it's not what are being called AI in the current sense, which is what people call generative AI, which include things like Chatgpt, which is a large language model AI program and so forth. And now we get into an area, and personally, I'm speaking personally of this, but there's a lot of data that's emerging to support all of the things I'm about to say to you. It's shrinking cognition among students, leading to uncritical thinking, that is, lack of cognitive skills. Cheating is rampant in schools because of the opportunity to use Chatgpt instead of your own mind to do your assignments. It's leading to teacher burnout. Chatgpt, this comes out of an article, maybe eroding critical thinking skills. There are many articles that really support this with data now. Okay, the other thing about knowledge is it's also producing rampant disinformation that basically feeds into what people are thinking is truth or knowledge, if you will. The example of this comes from Science magazine, where a group of people scientists looked at how AI operates in a political conversation and so forth. And it says a substantial portion of the information was false. Massive loss of white-collar jobs. You could see this in the journal Sentinel. There was an article in the last day or two about this, okay? Well, here we have our two characters here, Bill Gates and Elon Musk. Gates says humans may soon not be needed for most things. Musk says humans won't have to work at all, at least within 20 years or so. I'm not sure what the economic model is that makes this work, but That's what people are saying, and that's what seems to be starting to be happening, where you see large layoffs as AI takes over some straightforward white-collar jobs. The other is the future of society, digital dystopian future. This is also actually even predicted or suggested by leaders of tech companies. So AI could design a lethal pathogen that then wipes out humanity in one way or another. And I'm just going to show you this. This goes back to a question that was rampant in the 1940s and 50s. Are there alien intelligent civilizations, around the Milky Way? Enrico Fermi, Nobel Prize winner, discovered how to control nuclear fission, asked, if there are all these civilizations, where are they? Well, actually, that spawned a whole subgroup of individuals saying, well, why don't we see them there? Why? They destroy themselves. Once they get to a certain intellectual level, they produce things like nuclear weapons, or they produce climate change, or they produce AI, and the civilization collapses, and so they're not there to communicate, if you will. All right, so we're going to focus on energy and water, but let's remember, when we're thinking about these data centers, you really should ask the question, are they worth it for us and for our society? That question is just kind of being punted, I think, by most people. Okay, so climate change causation. Here's where the economics comes in. This is a look at long-term GDP going back to 1880. You have an exponential increase in GDP, goods and services that are being produced by the society, if you will. Well, when you do anything, you need energy to do it. So you produce goods, you do services, you need energy. That energy came from, and still comes predominantly from, the burning of fossil fuels. All right, so here's what's happening with energy use. It's following approximately that same curve of an exponential increase. If you just take a look at the chemical equation for burning natural gas or methane, you have methane plus...
Could you use your pointer from there so you can talk into the microphone, please?
Sorry. All right. So if you follow this, you burn methane by reacting with oxygen to produce heat energy. All of our energy production up until very, very recently, except for a little bit of nuclear fission, has come from the burning of fossil fuels to produce heat energy, which drive what we call heat engines. They produce electricity this way. Our cars operate by producing heat energy and so forth. And the point about this is that you get the heat energy, but at the same time you get a proportional amount of carbon dioxide being formed as well. So you can imagine, as you're increasing the amount of burning, you're also increasing the amount of carbon dioxide. And when we go back to our original figure, you can see now that if you put on the same plot the increase in carbon dioxide, it basically follows that same curve. So the connection, and we're not spending a lot of time with this, but just to remind ourselves, the connection is between carbon dioxide production and temperature rise. Now, a couple things that we want to say here, and these are extremely important. I'm just going to focus on carbon dioxide, but let's recognize that methane, or natural gas, and nitrous oxide, a product of basically microorganisms metabolizing fertilizer, nitrogen fertilizers, all of these contribute to what's going on in terms of global warming. I'm going to focus on carbon dioxide because that's the major one here. And the big thing I want you to appreciate is what we call a half-time for the turnover of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now, the way to think about this is supposing that we could just stop all of the inputs of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And then we just watched how fast the concentration decreases in the atmosphere. And it will decrease over time because there are geological processes that basically remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. But the point about this is it would be many centuries before we saw this happen to any extent. So, you take a look at what we're saying here. Warming from CO2 is essentially irreversible. We've put it in the atmosphere, it's not going anywhere. We just keep putting it, concentration increases, that concentration is going to be elevated for as long as we can think about a future. All right, so this is a one-way street. So it's an extremely serious issue, if you will. All right, responding to climate change, briefly. Everything has to be decarbonized in our society. That starts out with the modes of energy production, and basically we're saying everything has to be converted over into electricity that is itself generated by non-carbon dependent means. Okay? But the other side of it, which we don't talk about so much, is everything, this building, everything that uses energy also has to become compatible with using electricity. All right? That's probably the harder part of this conceptually, because every single building, every single thing that we do, every single automobile has to become electric or related to the generation of carbon-free electricity. All right, so fortunately, we have the solution. As many people, particularly in this country, would like to think that we should do something other than renewable energy, the fact of the matter is renewable energy is this remarkable gift to mankind. It not only does direct generation of electricity from a spinning turbine or basically a photovoltaic cell that converts light into electricity, but it has all of these other features, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this, but there's no cost to the energy that's the source. These are very simple machines to take care of. They use virtually no water, no heat, no air pollution, no radioactive waste, no chance of major accidents. They're inexpensive. Okay, so there is no source of energy that at all competes with solar and wind any longer. Okay, certainly not nuclear. Nuclear probably is 5 to 10 times more expensive. Okay, so we've got the solution. The question is, will we actually avail ourselves of it? All right, that's a background that's important to understand as we move into this unexpected challenge of data centers. Now here's an overhead picture on the left of the Microsoft Hyperscale data center down in Mount Pleasant. It's a huge facility, okay? Inside are just all of these banks of servers, thousands upon thousands of computers that are linked together in order to be able to support artificial intelligence. And they all depend upon these NVIDIA chips that cost $40,000 to $50,000 a piece. So they're making NVIDIA into the most, the wealthiest corporation in the world at the present time. And they're necessary to do this large language model, Chatgpt type of artificial intelligence. Okay, now let's go back to what we were just looking at. You see, what we have to do, and I was implying this before, is we've got to move from the fossil fuel economy to the zero carbon economy, and that means that we got to get to net zero carbon emissions And it's too bad we didn't start back in 1970 or 80 and so forth. But we're up in a region now when, up until very recently, in this country, we've leveled off our total use of energy. And so at least we've got a breather, if you will, to do this. But something unexpected happened along the way. Starting in about 2024, these large hyperscale data centers began to be built and so forth. And now the prediction is that over the next 5 years, US energy demand is going to go up about 20%, and perhaps up to 50% of that, half of that, is coming from building these data centers. And actually more recent, this analysis was done in 2024, more recent analyses suggest that they're actually going to be contributing more than that, and that this could be 25%. Well, that's an enormous, first of all, we're the largest economy in the world. And you say we're going to increase our total energy use by 25%. That's an enormous amount of energy that we're talking about. All right, so that's where we've gotten ourselves into. Maybe I didn't be clear about this and point this out, but you see now we're no longer in this regime, we're heading up again. All right, so that just makes it more difficult for us to do. All right, so I thought that a good way to frame what are the actual issues here are to look at what We Energies is doing. Okay, We Energies is a large energy producer, but there are large energy producers all over the country faced with the same issues that We Energies are. So in 2022, We Energies put forward a climate report, and they also put forward how they were going to keep moving along on their plan. Now, they have already had in place this notion, or this plan, about how to get to net zero by 2050, okay, which historically has been the point at which we said we had to get to net zero in order to save ourselves from all of these catastrophic effects of climate change. So they started keeping track in 2005 and said, okay, in 2005 they were putting X amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and we'll call that 100%. We got to get down to 0% by 2050, and this is what they've been doing. So by 2023, they got down to around 52% of the original amount. Now, how did they do that? They basically were starting out with coal and nuclear, and they began transitioning from coal to natural gas. Now, what that does for you is coal per unit amount of energy generated produces twice as much carbon dioxide as does natural gas. So if you simply convert from coal to natural gas, you're going to cut your total emissions by half. Okay, that's what they're in the process of doing, if you will. And they always had some nuclear, and that's still there. Yes?
Yeah, I hate to interrupt, but isn't there a lot of research showing that the leakage, the fugitive emissions of methane, more than cancel out the climate benefits of reduced CO2 emissions from coal going to gas? That there's all this leak of methane gas, which is
There is. No, I don't think
There's research showing it's not helping.
they don't cancel it out, but that's the other side of it, okay? We mentioned methane, and methane is contributing to, so to the extent you have leaks in your system.
Yeah, and please, no questions until he's done, then we have a portable mic. We'll allow everybody.
Okay, sorry. Okay, we'll come back to that. All right, so starting in 2023, then, we're going to continue coal to natural gas, but in 25 to 2030, you're going to be getting this transition involving actual renewable energy or solar energy. And then finally, the natural gas plants that you had built were going to be converted to solar to get to net zero by 2050. So that's the picture, if you will. And this is just another way of showing it. And we want to focus on this region right here because that's where we are at the present time. Now, my wife was in a League of Women Voters. One weekend gave me an assignment, and she said, well, read the Public Service Commission document that We Energies had submitted for its last gas plant. Remember last year there was quite a lot of publicity about and controversy about putting in another gas plant, if you will. And so I read through this document, and to be honest, it's a little bit opaque. But one of the things that showed up in the middle of this is this figure. It's a figure of power. Power is not energy. Power is energy per unit time. Let's not worry about the difference here, but they're showing power here versus period of time, and we're back over here. And the interesting thing about this is here's what happens normally. Every winter you have a spike in energy use and so forth. But by the time we get to 27 to 28, all of a sudden there's a huge 50% increase in the amount of energy that We Energy says it's going to need to operate. So I'm wondering, what's that all about? And you could imagine, okay, converting natural gas to electric heat, if you will. Instead of using natural gas for heating, we're going to use electricity for heating. Maybe that was it. Maybe conventional cars there's so many of them being purchased and on the road that this will actually have a major impact on We Energy. So these are electric vehicles. It's neither one of those. They simply said, this is because of I-43 economic corridor, economic growth. They didn't say data centers, but I looked at it and I said data centers. Okay, even a year or so ago, you could start projecting this. But that's a lot of new energy that they're suggesting have to go into these data centers. Okay, now, what's the situation that's emerging? Okay, so here's a map of southeast Wisconsin, and it shows where there are projects that are underway. We're not going to talk about the one in Beaver Dam because we actually don't know that much about the one in Beaver Dam in terms of energy use. But the huge one up in Port Washington that is going to provide data centers for Oracle and OpenAI, and the ones down in Mount Pleasant and possibly Kenosha for Microsoft are the two that we're going to be talking about here. So what do we know about their energy requirement? Or I'm going to be showing this in terms of power. But power is proportional to energy if you're operating all the time. And so here's what we have. That in Port Washington, the first part of a two-part project is going to require 1,300 megawatts or 1.3 gigawatts of energy, the total being 3,500 megawatts or 3.5 gigawatts of energy. That's an enormous amount of energy. Down in Mount Pleasant, they've already almost completed a data center that's going to require 450 megawatts. There's another one, as I understand it, an exact identical data center that it will be built very soon. So another 450 megawatts that are already there. And as you've heard recently, they want to put in another 15 data centers. That doesn't say anything about how much each one of those data centers requires in terms of energy. It's just they said another 15, but we'll kind of leave that on the side. Now let's put that in context. The city of Madison, now this is my estimate, uses about 1,000 megawatts. Okay, so you're talking about projects here that are on a scale of what the whole city of Madison uses. I hate to talk about Madison as somebody's University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, but we're going to use that as our example. But now, here's another way of looking at it. Okay, so for that 3,500 megawatts, that's equivalent to all the homes, powering all the homes in Wisconsin. For Mount Pleasant site, that 900 megawatts is the size of the city of Madison. Okay, and in this 1,000 megawatts, you're including homes, transportation, industry, and all of your commercial activity. So I hope you appreciate these are absolutely huge. And remember, they're just on a small, relatively speaking, small plot of land in comparison with the city of Madison, okay? All right, so let's come back then to where we were going. This is where We Energies thought they were going. I don't know if they thought they were going. They said they were going, all right? So this was the original plan to get down during this period of time, 23 to 30, down to a minus 80% relative to the original, which would have been really, really good. Okay, 3,800 megawatts of renewable energy. Now they were going to add a little natural gas, 900 megawatts, but they were going to get rid of 1,400 megawatts of coal, which produces all of this CO2. So in a net sense, they would be putting in 3,300 megawatts, okay? Now, in 2025, all of a sudden this is all changed. What is projected for these centers was, first of all, advantage. Let me say this first, 1,300 megawatts. We saw that before. Now, for Microsoft, you would say 900 megawatts. But actually, We Energies has now put forward its new plan, and they say 1,800 megawatts. So I assume what they're saying is these other 15 data centers, they already know what they're going to require, and that's another 900 megawatts. Does that make sense? Okay. You really have to triangulate a lot of this stuff. You can't just go, you can't even call up We Energies and ask them that question. All right, so we need an extra 3,100 megawatts. Now this is how We Energies says it's going to do it. They're going to still install 3,800 megawatts of renewables. They're not going to withdraw quite as much coal, although I don't know, from one report to another, maybe this is just a different person wrote it and didn't quite get the numbers right. But let's just say it for what it is. But the other thing is they're going to put in a lot of natural gas, which wasn't in the original plan. And what does that do then to their projection of getting down to a minus 80%? They go almost nowhere. So you get from a minus 48% to a minus 55%. Okay, so they missed their target by almost 80%. Now remember, all this time, you're putting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that's never coming out. It's adding to warming. Okay, now they recognize this actually. They said, we are reconsidering our near-term goals, okay? However, our long-term goal, but it's no longer long-term, it's only 25 years away, okay? Our long-term goal to achieve net carbon neutrality by 2050 remains intact, and that's going to help limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. We're already at 1.5 degrees Celsius. I mean, this is all, in a sense, it's all out of date. And it's all out of date because we keep burning fossil fuels that are putting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and scientists didn't quite get it right, so we're getting to 1.5 degrees Celsius sooner than we thought. Okay? All right, now, the International Energy Agency, which is the sort of the gold standard international group that sort of assesses where we are and so forth, basically projects that we're just going to keep going on the same pathway. It's true that we will use some, this is for data centers, in 2024 versus 2035, two different scenarios. This is renewable, this is nuclear, and this is natural gas. And instead of natural gas kind of taking over, they say it's just going to follow the same pathway. We're going to keep building more natural gas plants to support this huge increase in energy demand from these data centers. So you've got the long-term power and CO2 producing assets. They're there. They're going to be used. Okay? We're in a very difficult situation here because we've let this lapse so long in terms of doing anything. So now, if you put in a gas plant now, its natural life is 25 to 35 years at least. So if we don't use it all that time, then it'll be a stranded asset and somebody will pay for that. All right, now, I do want to briefly touch upon water because it's interesting. If you read, or you actually even go to some of these public forums, most people are concerned about water. They don't seem to be concerned about energy. And here's their concern. So let's say you've got a data center. Data centers, let's say you've got a 450 megawatt data center. So 450 megawatts power are coming in 24/7. Well, basically first law of energy. Energy is not created or destroyed, it's just changed in form. What happens? It comes in as electricity, it goes out as heat. So that 450 megawatts, which is a huge amount of energy, remember, that's half the size of Madison, is now going to generate an equivalent amount of heat. So these data centers have to be intensively cooled. So the original thought was, well, we'll draw water from the lake and it'll pick up the heat and we'll dump the hot water back in the lake. That's what We Energies does all the time out at Oak Creek and so forth. So that was about 9 times 10 to the 9th, 9 billion kilocalories per day. I can't even tell you how much that is. I could tell you, but all right. All right, so, but let's just go back here. Here comes the natural gas fuel. And here's our power plant. Power plant is a heat engine. Heat engines have to basically send a fraction of the heat coming in into a cold reservoir, like Lake Michigan. Okay, and if you're 50% efficient, and that's really pushing it, but if you're 50% efficient, then half of all the heat that you're generating goes into Lake Michigan, and half of it is turned into electricity, which later on is producing heat. All right, so it is true, and if you go to these forums and so forth, people will say, remember that when you're talking about heat, you have to think about heat that's used in the generation of the electricity for these data centers. Okay, so that's something that originally people hadn't sort of considered. They were simply looking at what's happening at the data center itself, but the fossil fuel or nuclear power plant is generating all this heat as well. All right? Well, nobody's going to let these data centers put out this much heat per day, and that's been made abundantly clear to them, and Microsoft has simply said, well, we're going to do it differently. We're going to use what's called closed-loop water cooling. Okay, which would greatly diminish the amount of energy use. And now they're talking about just 8 million gallons per year. All right, before we were talking about every day requiring 230 million gallons. So this would be just terrific, right? And the way that would be done, though, this is the part that also doesn't quite get into the discussion. So you've got a closed cooling loop like this that is removing heat from the data center. End of story. That's the way it is usually presented, but that heat can't just sit there, it has to go somewhere. So it goes through, basically, we'll just call it a heat exchanger, a bunch of tubes that contain the liquid, and you're putting at very high velocity and volume, you're putting external air across those tubes to basically pick up the heat. And this is what you have at the site. These are all fans. Each one of them is 20 feet in diameter. There are 172 of them. That's 54,000 square feet of fan to basically move this hot air away. Well, I got to thinking about this, and I'm probably the only one who is, and so I take responsibility if this is all wrong, okay, what I'm about to tell you. Okay, let's think about this. So here's what's happening. You've got a higher temperature water. It goes through the heat exchanger, comes out lower temperature, so it can keep going around. Here you've got lower temperature air, gets converted to higher temperature air as it passes through the heat exchanger, if you will. So this is basically what you're seeing. This is basically what you're seeing here. And we're just going to say that we're going to keep this difference in temperature to 10 degrees Celsius, or that's 18 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a big temperature difference in terms of the air, if you will, that you see. And if we're going to take this 900 megawatts of energy at power production at Microsoft, then that ends up generating 1.8 times 10 to the 13th calories per day. If I couldn't do the previous figure, I certainly can't do this one for you. But it's you know, you're talking about heat that's equal to the amount that would be produced by the entire city of Madison over this huge area of Madison. It's now being done over the data center. Okay, so I just did a little thought problem here. Okay, supposing you're pushing this upwards and you let it have a height, that plume, of 250 feet, what's the diameter or radius of a cylinder that would accommodate all of that energy that's being produced as heat, such that it would be 18 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? I don't know, your eyes may be glazing over, but the point is, during a first hour, that 250-foot high plume would have a radius of 1.2 miles. After 6 hours, when you've put a lot more energy up there, it would have a radius of 2.8 miles. If you put this on a map, here's the data center area. Here's the 1 hour circle for the cylinder. Here's the one for 6 hours. And you can see you're covering a large area with a huge amount of heat, which of course raises the temperature, in this case, 18 degrees. Now wait a minute, there's something wrong here. I hope it's not me. Or maybe I should say I hope it is me, because I hope that it doesn't work this way, but I think it does. And you notice that this now covers most of Sturtevant. Well, of course, there's a prevailing wind in this direction, so basically that heat is going to head toward Racine or maybe down toward Kenosha. Okay, so this, I think, is a major issue that really hasn't been considered here, because that heat has to go someplace, okay? All right, now I'm going to conclude by going back to this picture. We got to get to net zero. We've just made it a lot more difficult because of hyperscale data centers. And James Hansen, you may have seen his name. He's probably one of the most visible climate scientists. He wrote in an article, "Short-term economic self-interest trumps small t, concern about long-term degradation of the local and global commons." Okay, so, I mean, we really are talking about commercial interests here. They're simply saying, I'm coming in, I'm plopping down this, something that we've never seen before in terms of energy use, energy production, and so forth. And what's the common good in all of this? Well, it made me think of a friend of mine, Bill Holohan, who's going to be speaking here, by the way, in about 3 weeks about economics. I've told you everything I know about economics. He can tell you a lot more. The private capitalist sector must be complemented by an equally strong public sector that is responsible for all the parts of society that a private sector cannot or will not take responsibility for. Okay, that's why we have a public sector. That's why we have government. So if we think about solutions here for data centers, I would say, putting the term public at the front end, we've got to prioritize, first of all, the climate change solution of getting to net zero. You also have to, we haven't talked about this at all, but prioritize preservation of the biosphere, okay? We could get to net zero and still completely screw up the biosphere. And then finally, public oversight of commercial big technology. We could have almost a whole hour talking about the way they have operated in this area. People call it, quote, transparency. I think it's a lot darker than that, actually, but that's one way of talking about it. So the way to sort of build this in to a governmental system is through what people have talked about as integrated resource planning and that replaces a public service commission. Public Service Commission has a very narrow mandate in looking at projects that are brought before it. It doesn't look at health, doesn't really look at the environment. It simply looks at a project and asks a few questions, and then oftentimes basically goes ahead and approves it, all as individual projects. Now, in an empty world where the human component is really small, that probably doesn't make any difference. You can do that, and you can get away with it in terms of the operation of the planet. But in a full world, such as we live in, can't do that any longer. So this is the way I kind of view a integrated resource planning process. Yes, you've got to include consideration of energy and water the way we've been doing here, but you also have to think about land, air, plants and animals, all of these things as resources, and human beings as part of this whole system as well. So that's kind of where I'm going to end this. I'm just going to put this up. Whoops. If we wanted to talk about it, we could, but I've just added in all the things that I think need to be thought about with respect to a data center. And they fall into all of these areas. And if you don't consider all of those, you're likely to have major problems going down the road. So I'll end there and be glad to talk with you. We can come back to the methane question. And thank you very much. Now,
I have one.
Let me, should I stay by the microphone?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right.
Thinking about your description of the heat silo rising above the data center,
Yeah.
my understanding is that heat rises. You seem to be saying that it will spread across the land to the diameter you described and cause problems.
Sure.
Am I misunderstanding something?
Heat rises, but remember, there's also the ambient air that's present. You're going to get turbulence immediately because of these 172 things, yeah. But once you get up in the atmosphere, you simply got the weather itself that's moving that around. So it certainly is going to diffuse laterally as well as go up. Yeah.
Is it realistic to believe that we can actually fix this?
Fix what? No, honestly, which thing were you thinking about? The climate issue?
The climate issue, it's all related.
Right, and it's enormously complicated. It can't be fixed unless you have a strong public sector that's working on this. This is a problem in this country, as we all know. Around the rest of the world, actually, it is being fixed. People are working very hard on the climate issue throughout the rest of the world, literally, except in the United States. We made a good start during the Biden administration, and that's just come to a screeching halt and actually has been put in reverse during the current administration. So yeah, you got an issue. So this is a public issue, fundamentally. This is not a technology issue. We know how to solve the problem. The question is, do we have the will to do it? Or do we have the mechanisms within our government and society and so forth to be able to do it? That's a real question in this country.
Yes, so just to come back to it, then I'll get to one other thing. I just wanted to point out there's a lot of research that suggests that gas to make electricity is not an improvement over coal because gas is methane. It's one of those powerful greenhouse gas emissions, and a lot leaks out in terms of the mining it and distributing it and burning it and so on, and that makes up for the improvement as far as carbon dioxide. Just one other thing to point out, State Senator Chris Larson was here at the beginning, and he's a member of the church here, and he introduced what I believe to be the best bill, which is probably consistent with what you're talking about. It's called Pause and Protect. It would put a pause on building of these data centers until we have a lot of the things that our guest is talking about. So people should pay attention and advocate for that bill, the Pause and Protect bill.
Yeah, I'm wondering, given what you said, if the snowbirds might just move around Mount Pleasant in winter instead of going south. I mean, this is just in Wisconsin. Are these data centers going up around the country?
Yes. I can't give you sort of a quantitative picture of this, but there are data centers, large data centers like this going up in Indiana. That's an Amazon data center, the one that I'm familiar with. There are others going up out in the west, which seems a very peculiar place to put these from the standpoint of the heat problem. But Virginia is kind of the epicenter of data center installations, and they're putting in hyperscale data centers. I think Michigan has one that is in the process over near Detroit. And so, yes, they are, I think wherever these companies can find open land, that's a possibility. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm concerned about like blackouts. So, we've had a lot of energy disruptions. What happens to a data center when it does not have access to energy to run it?
Well, as far as the data center is concerned, my understanding is they're going to build in a lot of backup. Okay, this will be batteries, generators, whatever you can use for, short-term disruptions. You can you can basically shift to a local source like that. So I think they'll probably figure it out for themselves. There's a statement I didn't include here from the CEO of Microsoft, in which he talks about that it's important that they do their share in terms of making sure we have enough energy, because otherwise the public wouldn't have enough energy. I mean, you can see who's, obviously first in their mind and so forth. But I think that they're gonna make it work for themselves. I think that part is gonna probably not be an issue. It's, does it work for everybody else?
So, given all of the energy needs to deal with the heat and to deal with the power, is it feasible that you could have enough renewable energy to make these power centers literally carbon neutral? Would it be so many solar panels and so much wind that it's just not feasible?
Let's put it this way. Again, technically, there's no problem in doing this, okay? The problem is, will we do it? Okay, so in Wisconsin, for example, or in this country, you've got now a sort of a resurgent nuclear energy sector that thinks what are called small modular nuclear reactors are the answer. Okay, so this is like, here's where we're going, and somebody says, look over there. And I'll just give you my quick take on small modular nuclear reactors, but none of those are going to be online until 2030 something or other. We need this now, actually, however you want to look at it. Number two, according to Stanford University, the amount of energy that will be generated by just the best estimate, I mean the most expansive estimate for these small modular nuclear reactors is, in a sense, trivial in terms of the amount of energy we actually need to generate electrically. This is all basically, again, commercial interests wanting to push their own thing and trying to put the best spin on it. The best spin is renewable, and the best evidence for that is China. China is putting in at least half of all of the solar-powered energy in the world every year. And we are doing almost nothing by comparison in this country. So they can do it. We could do it also. There are certain issues that come up with solar that are different than what you would have with a nuclear plant or a gas plant and so forth. But again, there are very good answers for those that are either operational now or on the near horizon. So I think this is just a matter of do we love our children and grandchildren enough to do this, or are we going to drink the Kool-Aid and keep on using fossil fuels?
I think that's a good time to end.
Okay.